At 9:07 that morning, my mom sent one message that changed everything. Your brother needs a little help again. I told him you'll handle it. I stared at the screen, coffee in hand, steam rising between me and those words that felt like a punch to the gut. My thumb hovered over the keyboard for what felt like an eternity. And then I replied with 5 words I'd never dared to type before. I'm not doing this anymore. I didn't know it yet, but that text would break a family pattern older than my adulthood. A pattern that had been suffocating me for so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe freely. Tell me, have you ever been the dependable one everyone leans on until leaning turns into taking? They call you strong, but what they mean is you'll never say no. What they mean is you're the one they can count on to sacrifice your own needs, your own dreams, your own sanity, because you're responsible, because you're reliable, because you're the one who always figures it out. Well, let me tell you something about being the strong one, the reliable one, the one everyone counts on. It's a prison sentence disguised as a compliment. My name's Lara, I'm 31, and I've been the organized one my entire life. Translation: unpaid problem solver, emotional dumping ground, and family ATM, all rolled into one convenient package. For 3 decades, I've been the person everyone calls when life gets messy, when dreams crumble, when bills pile up, when reality hits and suddenly everyone needs someone else to clean up the wreckage. Our home looked peaceful from the outside, laughter echoing from the kitchen, the smell of Mom's famous casserole drifting through the hallways, polished smiles at family gatherings. Picture perfect, really. The kind of family you'd see in a commercial selling life insurance or breakfast cereal. Warm hugs, inside jokes, the whole Norman Rockwell fantasy. But underneath it all was a silent economy that I'd been too blind, too conditioned, too desperately seeking approval to recognize for what it was. My hours, my money, my peace of mind, all traded for the illusion of being needed, for the drug of being indispensable, for approval that always seemed just out of reach. The family dynamic was crystal clear once you knew where to look. Mom the peacemaker, always smoothing over conflicts with guilt disguised as love. Dad the critic, whose disappointment hung over every conversation like a storm cloud. My brother Jake, the eternal dreamer, floating through life on charm and empty promises. And me, the safety net stitched so tight, I'd forgotten I was supposed to have holes to breathe through. God, how did I become this person? How did I become the one who automatically said yes before the question was even finished? How did I become so comfortable being uncomfortable, so used to being used, that I actually believed this was what family looked like? It started innocently enough. It always does, doesn't it? Small loans that turned into regular bailouts. Just until I get back on my feet, sis. You know I'm good for it. Family helps family. The holy trinity of manipulation wrapped in the bow of blood relation. Jake's first emergency happened when I was 23, fresh out of college, working my first real job and feeling like maybe finally I was building something for myself. His car broke down, needed $800 for repairs. Mom called me crying. Not for herself, but for him, because that's what she did. She carried his pain like it was her own, and then she passed it to me like a baton in some twisted relay race of codependency. He's really trying this time, Lara. He's got that job at the warehouse, and if he can't get to work, he'll lose it. You know how hard it is for him to find something steady. Something steady. As if stability was this elusive butterfly that just happened to avoid my brother, rather than a choice he'd never learned to make. I gave him the money. Of course I did. Because that's what good sisters do, right? That's what family means. And for a brief, shining moment, I felt needed, important. Like maybe this time, maybe finally, I was the hero of someone else's story. The car got fixed. Jake kept the job for exactly 3 weeks before he decided the manager was toxic and the hours were soul crushing. Apparently, getting up before noon was incompatible with his artistic spirit. But by then, I'd already learned the most dangerous lesson of my life. Saying yes felt good. Being needed felt better than being ignored. Being the solution felt more comfortable than being the problem. So when the next emergency came, rent money this time, I said yes again. When his phone got shut off, yes again. When he needed groceries, gas money, when he needed someone to co-sign a lease because his credit was shot, yes, 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 like a broken record stuck on the same note of self-destruction. Each time, Mom would call first. Never Jake himself, mind you. Always Mom, with her voice heavy with that special kind of guilt that only mothers can master. The guilt that doesn't sound like guilt at all, but like love, like worry, like the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders because her son, her baby, was struggling. I don't know what else to do, Lara. He's really trying. He just needs a little help to get over this rough patch. Rough patch. As if Jake's entire adult life wasn't one continuous rough patch, a never-ending series of bad decisions and missed opportunities that somehow always became my responsibility to smooth over. The loans turned into car insurance payments, just temporarily, until he can take over the policy. Temporary stretched into months, then years. The insurance became rent assistance, then full rent payments. He's going through a hard time with the breakup. He's having trouble finding work in his field. He's dealing with depression. Always an excuse. Always a reason why this time was different, why this time wasn't his fault. And I kept telling myself the lie that was slowly killing me. Family helps family. This is what love looks like. This is what being a good person means. But every month my own savings account shrank a little more. Every month I put off buying things I needed, going places I wanted to go, taking chances I was afraid to take, because there was always someone else's emergency taking priority over my own life. I started calculating everything in terms of what it cost versus what Jake might need it for. That weekend trip with friends? That's $300 that could go toward his utilities. Those new work clothes I desperately needed? That's money that could keep his car running for another month. That small apartment upgrade I'd been dreaming about? Forget it. Jake might need a security deposit somewhere. My life became a series of postponements and sacrifices that I'd convinced myself were temporary. Once he gets back on his feet, once he figures things out, once he finds the right opportunity, once, the cruelest word in the English language, and God forbid I ever wanted to take a weekend for myself, to do something purely for my own happiness. The guilt was immediate and suffocating. Mom would sigh that particular sigh that said more than words ever could. Must be nice having free time. I wish I could be that carefree. Some of us can't afford to be selfish. Selfish. That word became the knife they used to carve away pieces of my soul, one guilt trip at a time. I began to realize somewhere in my late 20s that I wasn't the helper anymore. I wasn't the supportive sister or the loving daughter. I was a resource, a renewable resource that never seemed to run dry, no matter how much they extracted from it. When Jake got evicted from his apartment, the one I'd been paying half the rent on for 8 months, Mom called me before he did, before he even knew she was calling me. She'd already worked out a plan that involved me co-signing a lease on a new place, covering the security deposit, and probably the first few months of rent until he got situated. I told the landlord you'd be happy to help with the paperwork, she said, as if I'd already agreed, as if my agreement was so guaranteed. She didn't even need to ask for it. And that's when it hit me like a freight train carrying 31 years of suppressed rage. I wasn't a person to them. I was a solution, a walking, talking, paycheck earning solution to problems I didn't create for people who had never learned to solve anything for themselves. I was the bank they could always count on to approve the loan, the insurance policy against their own poor choices, the safety net that had become so reliable they'd forgotten how to balance on their own. When did helping become enabling? When did love become exploitation? When did family become a trap disguised as a blessing? The breaking point wasn't dramatic. It wasn't some explosive fight or tearful confrontation. It was just Tuesday morning, 9:07 a.m., and a text message that felt like the final straw on the back of a camel who'd been carrying the world. Your brother needs a little help again. I told him you'll handle it. I told him you'll handle it. Not, would you be willing to help? Not, do you have the resources to assist? Not even, can we discuss this? Just the assumption, the expectation, the absolute certainty that I would once again sacrifice my own well-being for someone else's poor planning. I stared at those words until they blurred. I sat there in my kitchen, in the apartment I couldn't afford to upgrade because I was too busy funding someone else's life, drinking coffee I'd bought on sale because I was too careful with money I barely had for myself, and I felt something I'd never allowed myself to feel before: pure, undiluted rage, not the quiet resentment I'd been swallowing for years, not the frustrated sighs I'd been suppressing at family dinners, not the tired acceptance I'd been wearing like a comfortable old coat. Rage, white-hot, clarifying rage that burned through every excuse I'd been making, every justification I'd been clinging to, every lie I'd been telling myself about what this family dynamic really was. Something snapped, not broke, snapped, like a rubber band stretched beyond its capacity, like a rope pulled too tight, like a human being pushed past the point where bending becomes breaking. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't call Mom back to negotiate or explain or ask for details about what fresh crisis Jake had manufactured this time. I just typed the words that would change everything. I can't keep saving everyone. And then I did the scariest thing I'd ever done in my entire life. I opened my laptop, I opened my email, and I opened that job offer that had been sitting in my inbox for 2 months, the one I'd been too scared to even consider because it meant change, because it meant risk, because it meant admitting that maybe I deserved better than this. Remote position, full benefits, relocation assistance provided. My finger hovered over the mouse. This was it. The door marked exit. The chance to step out of the role I'd been playing for so long, I'd forgotten it was just a performance. I signed the acceptance letter before guilt could wake up and talk me out of it. The relief was immediate and terrifying, like jumping off a cliff and realizing you had wings you never knew existed. Within minutes, the calls started. My phone lit up like a Christmas tree, buzzing with the frantic energy of people who just realized their safety net had developed a tear. The first call was from Mom. I let it go to voicemail. Then Jake, then Mom again, then Dad, who never called unless someone had died or the world was ending. Apparently, me setting a boundary qualified as both. The missed calls turned into text messages. The text messages turned into what I can only describe as guilt paragraphs, carefully crafted emotional manipulation disguised as concern. I don't understand what's gotten into you. This isn't like you at all. Family is supposed to stick together. I'm disappointed in you. You're being selfish. You're abandoning us when we need you most. You've changed. They were right about that last part. I finally had changed. After 31 years of being whoever everyone else needed me to be, I was finally becoming myself. Dad's message was the most brutal because Dad had always been economical with his words, never wasting them on anything but the most cutting observations. Thought I raised you better than this. Guess I was wrong. Thought he raised me better? Better than what? Better than having boundaries? Better than valuing myself? Better than refusing to be a doormat dressed up as devotion? I spent that night going through my finances, canceling every automatic payment tied to their names. Jake's car insurance, canceled. The storage unit I'd been paying for while he figured out his living situation, canceled. The credit card I'd added him to for emergencies that had become weekly conveniences, canceled. Each click felt like cutting a chain. Each cancellation felt like taking back a piece of my life that I'd given away so gradually, I hadn't noticed it was gone until I started reclaiming it. They called me selfish. Maybe I was. Maybe selfishness was what I needed after a lifetime of selflessness that had left me empty, exhausted, and broke. Maybe selfishness was just self-preservation with a bad reputation. They said I'd regret it. Maybe I would. But for once, for the first time in my adult life, it would be my regret, my choice, my consequence to live with, instead of someone else's consequence to clean up. The job offer was real. The position was perfect. The timing was divine intervention wrapped in professional opportunity. 2 weeks later, I was packing my entire life into boxes, sorting through years of accumulated stuff, and realizing how little of it actually mattered. How much of what I'd been holding on to was really just evidence of a life I'd been too busy solving everyone else's problems to actually live. I found cards Jake had given me over the years. Thank you cards for the money. Apology cards for the disappointments. Promise cards for the changes that never came. A paper trail of gratitude that had never translated into growth. Appreciation that had never transformed into independence. I threw them all away. Moving day was silent. No family send-off. No tearful goodbyes. No last-minute pleas for reconciliation. Just me, a moving truck, and the strange peace that comes with finally choosing yourself after a lifetime of choosing everyone else. The drive to my new city was the longest and shortest 8 hours of my life. Long because every mile took me further from everything familiar. Short because every mile took me closer to something I'd never had before. A life that was entirely my own. 2 months later, I woke up to silence. Real silence. Not the quiet that comes before the storm of someone else's crisis. Not the calm that gets shattered by emergency phone calls and guilt-laden text messages. Just silence. Pure, unmarked, beautiful silence. No buzzing phone demanding immediate attention. No voicemails full of other people's problems masquerading as my responsibilities. No automatic anxiety about who needed what and how I was going to provide it. Just sunlight streaming through my window, hitting walls I'd painted colors I actually liked, illuminating furniture I'd bought for my own comfort instead of someone else's convenience. I brewed my own coffee in my own kitchen, paid my own bills with my own money, and sat in my own living room planning my own day according to my own priorities. And I realized something that should have been obvious but felt revolutionary. Peace isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself with fanfare or demand recognition. It just hums, quietly, contentedly, in the spaces between heartbeats. My family calls less now, sometimes not at all. The emergencies that used to be my emergencies have somehow resolved themselves or found other solutions, or revealed themselves to be less urgent than they'd seemed when I was the only option for fixing them. Jake got a real job, with real hours and real responsibilities. Apparently, when your sister's bank account is no longer available for withdrawal, you develop remarkable skills and self-sufficiency. Mom still calls occasionally, usually to tell me about some crisis I would have been expected to solve in the old life. But now she tells me these stories like she's sharing news, not recruiting help. Like she's forgotten I used to be the family fix-it person. Or maybe like she's finally learning to see me as something other than a solution. Dad doesn't call at all. I think my setting boundaries broke something in his understanding of who I was supposed to be. Or maybe it fixed something in my understanding of who I actually am. But I've learned something they never taught me, something I had to discover on my own in the silence of a life lived for myself. Love that drains you isn't love. It's dependence dressed as duty. It's need disguised as affection. It's emotional vampirism wrapped in the comfortable lies of family obligation. Real love doesn't require you to set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. Real love doesn't demand you sacrifice your dreams for someone else's comfort. Real love doesn't make you smaller so others can feel bigger. Real love wants you to thrive, not just survive. Real love celebrates your boundaries instead of testing them. Real love adds to your life instead of subtracting from it. I spent 31 years confusing love with obligation, care with control, help with harm. I confused being needed with being valued, being useful with being loved, being reliable with being respected. I was so busy being the person everyone could count on that I forgot to become the person I could count on. I was so focused on solving everyone else's problems that I never learned to solve my own. I was so committed to being strong for others that I never learned what my own strength could build when it wasn't being borrowed, depleted, and taken for granted. The hardest part wasn't leaving. The hardest part wasn't setting the boundary. The hardest part wasn't dealing with their anger or disappointment or accusations. The hardest part was learning to live with my own guilt, the guilt that had been programmed into me since childhood, the guilt that told me I was selfish for wanting more, wrong for asking for respect, bad for prioritizing my own well-being. The guilt that whispered I was abandoning people who needed me, even when those people had never learned to need themselves. The guilt that insisted I was breaking up the family, even when the family had been broken long before I found the courage to stop pretending it wasn't. But guilt, I've learned, is not the same as conscience. Guilt is what other people install in you to control your behavior. Conscience is what you develop to guide your own choices. Guilt tells you you're wrong for having boundaries. Conscience tells you you're wrong for not having them. Guilt tells you you're selfish for saying no. Conscience tells you you're self-destructive for always saying yes. Guilt tells you that love means sacrifice. Conscience tells you that love means respect. I'm still learning the difference. Some days are harder than others. Some days the old patterns try to reassert themselves, and I find myself reaching for my phone to check if anyone needs anything, to see if there are any crises that require my immediate attention. But then I remember the silence. I remember the peace. I remember what it feels like to wake up excited about my own day instead of anxious about someone else's problems. I remember what it feels like to have money in my savings account, plans for my future, dreams that aren't constantly deferred for someone else's emergencies. I remember what it feels like to be a person instead of a resource. And I choose me. Again and again and again, I choose me. If you've ever had to choose peace over guilt, I want you to know something. You're not selfish. You're not cold. You're not wrong. You're healing. You're learning that you matter too, that your dreams deserve space, that your needs deserve attention, that your boundaries deserve respect. You're learning that saying no to others sometimes means saying yes to yourself, that disappointing people who have never learned to manage their own disappointments is not your responsibility, that other people's emergencies are not your emergencies, especially when those emergencies are really just consequences of choices you didn't make. You're learning that love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's just mutual destruction disguised as devotion. The people who truly love you will learn to respect your boundaries. The people who don't respect your boundaries never truly loved you. They loved what you could do for them. And that difference, once you see it clearly, changes everything. That's the story of how a single text message on a Tuesday morning changed my life. How 5 words, "I'm not doing this anymore," became the key that unlocked the prison I'd built around myself with good intentions and misguided love. How I finally learned that the most radical thing you can do in a family system that depends on your self sacrifice is to value yourself. The most rebellious thing you can do when everyone expects you to say yes is to say no. The most loving thing you can do for people who don't know how to stand on their own is to stop being their crutch. Sometimes breaking the pattern means breaking your own heart first. Sometimes healing the family means stepping away from the family. Sometimes the most generous thing you can do is to stop giving. And sometimes, just sometimes, the person you've been waiting your whole life to save is yourself.